I told my boyfriend that his masculinity was fragile after he refused to buy me pads. My boyfriend Ethan and I had been dating for 2 years when this whole thing started. We lived in this tiny apartment together and split everything pretty evenly. He'd grab groceries, I'd cook dinner, normal couple stuff. But there was always this weird thing where he'd get uncomfortable about anything period-related. Like, if I left a tampon wrapper visible in the bathroom trash, he'd make this face like I'd left a dead rat there. If I mentioned cramps, he'd immediately change the subject or leave the room. I thought it was just typical guy awkwardness and figured he'd grow out of it. Then last month happened. I was at work when my period started early, which sucked because I had nothing with me. I texted Ethan asking if he could grab some pads from the store since he was already out running errands. He usually went to the grocery store on Wednesdays anyway. His response was immediate. "Can't you just get them on your way home?" I explained that I was stuck at work for another 4 hours and really needed them now. I even told him exactly which brand and where they were in the store. He lived at that grocery store. He knew where everything was. "Ask one of your coworkers." He texted back. I was confused. My coworkers were all middle-aged men who worked in construction. We were the only company in this tiny office building. I told him this, and his next message made my blood boil. "I'm not comfortable buying that stuff. It's embarrassing." I stared at my phone for like 5 minutes. This grown man who had no problem buying condoms, beer, or even my weird stomach medicine when I had food poisoning was too embarrassed to buy period products for his girlfriend of 2 years. I called him. "Ethan, I literally cannot leave work. I'm bleeding through my clothes. Just ask someone to cover for you or something. There's no one here to cover for me. You're being ridiculous." That's when he got defensive. "I'm not being ridiculous. I just don't want to be that guy in the store buying tampons. People will stare. Who cares if people stare? And I need pads, not tampons. Same thing. Look, can we talk about this later? I'm busy." He hung up on me. I ended up having to call my friend Jess, who drove 20 minutes out of her way during her lunch break to bring me supplies. She was furious when I told her what happened. When I got home that night, Ethan was playing video games like nothing had happened. I tried to talk to him calmly about it, explaining how humiliated I felt and how it wasn't that big of a deal to just buy pads. His response was to shrug and say, "I told you I was uncomfortable with it. You should have planned better." That's when I lost it. "Your masculinity is so fragile that you can't handle buying pads for your girlfriend." His face went red. "My masculinity isn't fragile. I just have boundaries." Boundaries? It's a normal bodily function. Half the population has periods. Well, I don't want to deal with it. The fight escalated from there. He started yelling about how I was being unreasonable and trying to emasculate him. I pointed out that he was acting like a child. He stormed out and didn't come back until the next morning. For the next week, things were tense. He kept making passive-aggressive comments about how I was making a big deal out of nothing and how I should respect his comfort zone. I started paying attention to other things he did that I'd never really noticed before. He refused to hold my purse for even 2 seconds while I tied my shoe. He wouldn't watch any movie with a female lead unless it had action scenes. He got weird when the cashier at the coffee shop complimented my hair in front of him. It was like he was constantly worried about appearing unmanly. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. I was making dinner and started getting cramps. I mentioned that I needed to take some ibuprofen, and he literally said, "God, you're always complaining about something." I turned off the stove and faced him. "You know what? You're right. I'm always complaining. I'm complaining because my boyfriend is too insecure to perform basic acts of human decency." Here we go again with the masculinity thing. Yes, here we go again. "Because you've made it clear that your image is more important than my comfort or health." We had the same fight all over again, but this time I didn't back down. I told him that if he couldn't handle dating someone who men rates, maybe he should date men instead. He accused me of trying to shame him. I told him he was already doing a great job of that himself. He moved out the next week, packed his stuff while I was at work, and left his key on the counter. For the first few days after Ethan left, the apartment felt quiet, not peaceful quiet. The kind of quiet that hums, like a wound that hasn't scabbed yet. His toothbrush was still in the cup, and his half-empty bottle of cologne sat on the dresser like a ghost of all the things we never fixed. I kept wondering if I'd overreacted, if maybe calling out his fragile masculinity had been too harsh. But every time that thought crept in, I remembered standing in that office bathroom, bleeding through my jeans. trying to clean up with toilet paper because my boyfriend was too embarrassed to buy pads. I tried to distract myself with normal things: work, cleaning, cooking dinner for one. But loneliness has a way of forcing you to replay everything. I thought about how many times I'd excused Ethan's behavior under the label of just a guy thing. The way he'd scoff when I talked about gender pay gaps, or how he'd tease me for wearing makeup on lazy days but complain if I didn't on others. It wasn't just about pads. It was about a pattern, a fragile ego dressed up as masculinity, one that I had been tiptoeing around for 2 years without realizing it. A week later, Jess came over with takeout and a bottle of wine. She flopped onto the couch, kicked off her shoes, and said, "You know, the fact that you had to explain basic empathy to a grown man is insane." I laughed, but it came out more like a sigh. Yeah, well, maybe I was hoping he'd grow out of it. Jess handed me a glass of wine. Men don't grow out of misogyny. They either confront it or cling to it. You just saved yourself another 5 years of mothering a man instead of dating one. That hit harder than I expected. Because deep down, I realized she was right. I had been parenting Ethan through his own insecurities, always reassuring him, always shrinking myself a little smaller so he could feel a little taller. A few days later, I ran into him at the grocery store. Of all places, the hygiene aisle. I almost laughed when I saw him standing there, staring at a wall of deodorants like he was picking out a nuclear launch code. He noticed me and looked awkwardly at the basket in my hand. I didn't say anything, just grabbed the box of pads I needed and put them in. He stared for a second, then muttered, "Guess you're not embarrassed, huh?" I smiled. "Nope, nothing to be embarrassed about." Then I walked away. When I got to the checkout, I realized something. I felt lighter. Not just because I was single, but because I wasn't walking on eggshells anymore. I didn't have to justify normal things or apologize for existing as a woman. That night, I threw away his leftover shampoo, his game controller batteries, all of it. It wasn't revenge. It was a quiet reclaiming of space. A few weeks later, I heard through mutual friends that Ethan was telling people I'd emasculated him. One of them even asked if I regretted it. I thought about it for a moment and said, if holding a box of pads makes a man question his masculinity, that's not my problem. That's his crisis. And honestly, that's what I learned from all of it. That real masculinity isn't threatened by empathy. It doesn't flinch at biology. It doesn't need to prove itself by rejecting softness or care. The next time I'm in a relationship, I'll make sure I'm with someone who doesn't see womanhood as something shameful or gross. Someone secure enough to walk into a store, buy pads, and not feel like the world is watching. Because at the end of the day, I don't want a man who's afraid of being that guy at the register. I want a man who's proud to be the kind of guy who shows up when it actually matters. Story 2. My 8-year-old son was involved in an incident at school and the police called me. I asked my wife to come, but she said, "It's not my problem." When I arrived, I was surprised to see the police talking to the teacher. They played security camera footage. My wife was on the screen. Chapter 1, the call that changed everything. The call came just after noon. I was in the middle of a client meeting, half listening to a marketing pitch when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I stepped outside to answer, assuming it was spam. "Mr. Harris," a voice asked. "This is Officer Daniels from Hillgrove Elementary. Your son was involved in an incident. We need you to come down immediately." My heart dropped. "Is he okay? He's safe, but we need you here as soon as possible." I froze. What kind of incident? "It's better we speak in person. And please don't come alone. Bring your wife too." My stomach twisted. As I hung up and dialed Lisa, my wife, I tried to steady my breath. We'd been distant for months now. She had grown cold, uninterested in our son, Ethan, and almost completely absent from family life. She answered on the third ring, sounding annoyed. "What? There's been an incident at school. The police are involved." "They asked me to bring you silence then. It's not my problem." I blinked. "What the hell do you mean, not your problem?" "It's your son." "I'm busy. You handle it." She hung up. I stared at my phone for a long moment. Something didn't feel right. Not just her response, but the urgency in the officer's voice. I canceled all my meetings and drove to the school, trying to make sense of it all. What kind of incident involved an 8-year-old and required the police? But nothing could have prepared me for what I was about to witness. Chapter 2. The footage that changed everything. The officer tapped the keyboard and the grainy footage began to play. I leaned in, my heart racing, trying to piece together what was happening. The timestamp showed it was from just 2 days ago, after school hours. The hallway was mostly empty, save for a few children walking out of their classrooms. Then she appeared. My wife, wearing her red coat, standing just outside room 104, my son's homeroom. She looked restless, checking her watch repeatedly. Moments later, a man walked into the frame, someone I didn't recognize. He handed her an envelope. She opened it, pulled out a thick wad of cash, and tucked it into her purse before disappearing down the hall without saying a word to my son, who came out seconds later, looking confused and alone. I was speechless. The officer paused the footage and looked at me. Do you recognize the man? I shook my head. No, but that's my wife. Why is she taking money at a school? The teacher finally spoke. That's what we're trying to understand, Mr. Khan. Your son was left alone after school hours multiple times. This incident escalated because he wandered off campus while unsupervised. We've tried contacting your wife. She's listed as the emergency contact. And she said it's not her problem, I muttered bitterly, remembering her cold tone on the phone. The principal entered the room just then, holding more documents. We may need to report this to child services if this continues, she said, her voice stern but not unkind. Your son is being neglected. But more concerning, it seems your wife has been using school premises for something we don't yet understand. I stared at the screen again. Why would she be taking money from a stranger? Why use our son's school as the meeting place? The officer continued. We've pulled other footage. This wasn't a one-time event. Your wife has met different individuals outside room 104 at least 4 times in the last 2 months. Always collecting something. Always leaving your son behind? A slow burn started in my chest. Anger, betrayal, confusion. What was she doing? And why was our son being dragged into it? I stood up, my voice low but firm. Can I get copies of all the footage? The officer nodded. We're filing a report and we'll send it with the case number. But Mr. Khan, I suggest you talk to your wife soon, because from what we've seen, this might only be the tip of the iceberg. Chapter 3. The footage that shattered everything. The room was silent except for the whir of the projector fan. The officer clicked a remote and the security camera footage began to play on a mounted screen. I leaned in, heart pounding, expecting to see maybe my son being bullied or perhaps acting out. But the video opened with a wide shot of the hallway just outside my son's second-grade classroom. There he was, standing near a locker, fidgeting nervously. Then came her. My breath hitched. It was my wife, dressed in dark jeans and a sweater, walking toward our son with something clenched in her hand. I couldn't understand what was happening until I saw her shove the item into his tiny hands, a phone. Then she crouched down to his level, speaking rapidly. There was no audio, but her expression was intense, not maternal. She looked around twice, paranoid, whispered something to him again, and left just as quickly. The timestamp on the video 10 minutes before lunch. That same day, the school's internet firewall had been breached and several inappropriate videos were streamed from an internal device. Teachers were horrified when students, including my son, saw graphic content on class tablets. The IP address was traced to a hotspot created on a mobile device. My son's device, the one she handed him. I turned to the officer. What are you saying? The detective's eyes were calm but sharp. We suspect someone used your son to distribute illicit content within school grounds. Your son's too young to grasp what he was doing. He's not in trouble. But the adult who gave him that phone, is she left fingerprints all over the device? I was speechless. The teacher, Mrs. Collins, spoke up softly. Your son looked scared, Mr. Ramy. He kept saying, Mom said if I hide this for her, she'll love me more. I swallowed hard. My chest felt like it was caving in. I had no idea, I whispered. The detective leaned in. Mr. Ramy, would you be willing to give us access to any recent messages or financial statements connected to your wife? We believe this may be part of a larger pattern, possibly even an ongoing scheme. It felt like the walls were closing in. I thought my wife was just neglectful. But this was something else. Something darker. Something criminal. And I wasn't about to sit back and protect her. Not after this. Chapter 4, The Hidden Web. I barely slept that night. While my son curled beside me, gripping my shirt like a lifeline, I stared at the ceiling, consumed by memories and unanswered questions. How long had this been going on? Was it just manipulation or something far more sinister? The next morning, I dropped my son off with my sister and returned home alone. The house, once a place of warmth, now felt like a crime scene. I sat at my wife's desk, the one she always kept locked. I had found the spare key months ago, but never used it until now. With trembling hands, I opened the drawer. Inside, 2 burner phones, a small stack of cash, and chillingly a file folder marked with names, dates, and what looked like transaction logs. My heart stopped. Each entry had a code, a dollar amount, and initials. Repeating initials, DRPM, and repeatedly RR. My wife's name was Rita Remy. I quickly snapped photos of every page and backed up everything to a private cloud folder. Suddenly her laptop, which I'd long believed to be strictly for work, looked far more suspicious. I logged in. It didn't take long to uncover what the police suspected. Encrypted chat logs, private access to a medical courier network that seemed to have nothing to do with her field, and a side business hidden in plain sight, offering consultations to men looking to exploit gray areas in the legal system. Everything was masked under a shell LLC she co-owned with the same neighbor. Mr. Ralph, who had first tipped me off with that casual, "Hope your wife gets well soon," comment. It was a setup. He was in on it, possibly more than I ever imagined. And my wife, she was using our son, our 6-year-old child, as a pawn to move phones, data, even devices into places no one would expect. I felt bile rise in my throat. And that's when I knew this wasn't just betrayal. This was a war, and I was about to start fighting back with everything I had. Chapter 5. A Father's Fury. A Strategist's Move by Dawn. I was no longer a heartbroken husband. I was a man on a mission. I didn't go to the police, not yet. I needed leverage, I needed irrefutable proof. And I needed to hit them in a way they'd never recover from. So I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Colonel Heideter, my old friend from university. He now worked in cybercrime for the Intelligence Bureau. The kind of man who could look past legal red tape if it meant exposing something truly vile. He didn't hesitate. He met me that night in an unmarked vehicle somewhere far from my neighborhood. I handed him the burner phones, the logs, and my wife's hard drive backup. When he finished skimming through it, he looked at me in silence, then muttered, "You're sitting on a gold mine." This isn't just infidelity. It's human trafficking, data laundering, and possibly medical malpractice. I swallowed hard. And my son, Colonel Heideter's jaw clenched, used as a decoy. That's why she was always so calm, leaving him alone. No one suspects a child carrying a flash drive tucked in a toy. It makes customs, security, everything easier. I felt a cold rage take over. "She's coming back tomorrow," I whispered. Should I act shocked? Pretend I don't know anything. Heideter nodded. "Yes, let her talk." "Stall her. We'll be watching everything from outside." Then he paused. "And when the time comes, I'll make sure your son sees you as a hero, not a victim." That night, I cleaned the house. I folded her clothes. I cooked dinner. I even placed her favorite perfume on the dresser. She needed to believe she still had control. She walked in the next evening, all smiles, fake apologies, and smooth lies. "I just needed a break," she said, kissing my cheek. "You and our son were overwhelming me. I didn't mean to scare you." I didn't respond. I just looked into her eyes and said, "Welcome home." Because tomorrow, she wouldn't be waking up here ever again. Chapter 6. The Takedown. The next morning began like any other. I made breakfast. My wife, still wearing her mask of innocence, hummed as she fed our son and scrolled through her phone. She had no idea that several black SUVs were parked 2 blocks away, surveillance drones in the sky, and every device in the house was tapped. At 9:13 a.m., the doorbell rang. She looked up, confused. "You expecting someone?" I shook my head. "Nope." She opened the door. What she saw froze her in place. 4 men in plain clothes. IDs flashed. One of them, Colonel Heideter, stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said calmly. "You're under investigation for federal offenses, including identity fraud, cybercrime, and endangerment of a minor. Please come with us." She laughed nervously, trying to play innocent. "This must be a mistake. I'm just a housewife." Then she turned toward me, but I didn't look confused. I looked ready, my arms crossed, my expression stone cold. "You used our son like a pawn," I said. "You brought strange men into our house. You lied, stole, and disappeared. But the worst thing you did?" I pointed to our child who was sitting quietly at the table with headphones on. "You made him feel like a burden." She lunged at me, shrieking, "You set me up?" "No," I said, "you set yourself up the moment you underestimated me." She was cuffed before she could take another step. That's when her phone buzzed. Heideter glanced at it. Another message from Dr. Salman, he said. He's asking if the next batch is ready. What batch was he talking about? I didn't flinch, but my wife went pale. I don't know. Heideter smirked. You will in custody. As they dragged her out, I followed them to the door. The neighbors peeked through windows, whispering. I wasn't embarrassed. I was liberated. And as they put her in the back of the vehicle, I said calmly, Tell the doctor this time. The only thing coming his way is a prison sentence. Final chapter. Justice served. Peace restored. 6 months later, the house was quieter now. Not the silence of tension, but of peace, of healing. My son laughed from the living room, building Lego towers while cartoons played in the background. He was seeing a child therapist twice a week. Not because he was broken, but because I wanted to make sure he never carried scars he didn't understand. He was thriving slowly but surely. As for my ex-wife, she was still in custody. The investigation had uncovered far more than I imagined. Money laundering, fake prescriptions, even blackmail threats sent to other families. That doctor wasn't even a real doctor. He was part of a larger operation she'd gotten involved with while I was away on work trips. Lured by promises of fast money and freedom. She thought she was being clever. She ended up in headlines instead. Mother implicated in child endangerment and fraud ring. One newspaper read, Local woman sentenced to 14 years for cybercrime and abuse. Another screamed. No one defended her, not even her own parents. And the neighbor, the one who sparked it all. I knocked on Mr. Ralph's door one evening with a bottle of non-alcoholic wine. He opened the door surprised. You don't hate me. I smiled. On the contrary, you saved my life. He blinked. All I said was, hope your wife gets well soon. Exactly, I replied. Sometimes that's all it takes to open your eyes. We toasted quietly under the stars. But I wasn't done. The house sold, the city left behind. I moved to a new town, started over with my son, a new job, a slower pace, a home that wasn't built on secrets, and every time someone asked if I had a wife, I simply smiled and said, no, just me and the most important person in the world, my son. And we're doing just fine. As for revenge, it wasn't just in her imprisonment. It wasn't in the headlines or the court documents. It was in every peaceful night's sleep my son and I finally got and the life she'd never again be part of. Was this revenge perfectly justified?